Hey all, for today's learning work, the very first thing you're going to do is go and get out your learning work that you took notes on yesterday, and I am going to go over it. And then you're going to come back and I'll go over the next step. But let's start off by reviewing what you did yesterday. So as you read yesterday, you did not need to write down the definitions. I just put it on there to help clarify some thoughts. So as you read, you found out that corporations allowed businesses that needed a lot of money to start possible because you had multiple people joining together their money to do that. You also found out that they're supervised by stockholders or a board. The reason this is can you imagine trying to get 5 people to agree on where to go to dinner, let alone 100? And so they literally had to decide, hey, we need a group of people to make these decisions, because sometimes those decisions wouldn't have been made otherwise. Then as you were reading about trusts, you found out that it made industries more efficient, and that it helped reduce competition. And then you read about monopolies and realized it gave companies the ability to control prices. Hopefully you've started to see the interconnections between this. If there is a trust, it pretty much guarantees that it's going to create a monopoly or vice versa. So these are very interconnected. Also, if you thought about your vocabulary word laissez-faire, you realize that because the government didn't really get involved, it created an environment where businesses and their owners had all of the power. Just so you guys have kind of a general idea about this, I did come down here, and another connection that's pretty obvious is that entrepreneurs wanted to start a business because ultimately they hoped that they would get a profit. So this is just another way for you guys to see how they're interconnected, and we'll come back to this again a little bit later. Then the next thing that you needed to do was to read about the working conditions. So when you looked at working conditions, you should have discovered that men got paid low wages, and because their wages were so low, they couldn't support their families. So that meant women had to go to work. They would work for $1 to $3 a day, which is anywhere between $6 and $18 a week. Owners refused to pay new workers until they'd learn their job. So sometimes you could be working for a company for 2, 3, 5 weeks without them paying you because you were still proving you were capable of your job. They also charged workers a maintenance fee for the machines that they use. So they'd get to work and they'd be like, all right, this is your machine. If anything happens to it or breaks, you have to pay to fix it as the worker. If workers complained that that wasn't fair or any of the other conditions weren't fair, they lost their job because there was plenty of other people looking for work and they knew that. So ultimately you couldn't complain because you needed your job so desperately. If you were a child during this time and your family was living in this situation, you would also go to work because your family needed the money. They would get paid $1 to $3 a week. So you're talking anywhere from like 16 cents to 50 cents a day if they got paid. If you got injured on the job, oftentimes you would just work through it. If you had to go see a doctor, you paid for them out of your pocket. And if your injury was so severe that you couldn't work anymore, they'd fire you. So essentially you get injured at work and you either brave it out and get through it, or you could lose your job too. Businesses were overcrowded because if they had to buy more space, it would cost them more money. And so oftentimes business owners would shove as many workers as they could in a spot to get work done. It was hot in the summer and cold in the winter. And fire safety was a huge concern. There were no fire escapes in most places. Doors opened inward instead of outward, and we'll talk a little bit about why that's such a big thing. And most of the time they had to work anywhere between 10 to 15 hours a day, sometimes a little bit longer. But essentially, if you think about any day and how much daylight we have, that's when they would work, from daylight, sun up to sundown. After you're done going over this, then down at the bottom, you went over the good things and bad things about this and added it to your list. So down here, you can see my costs are on the left, my benefits are on the right, and I've just been kind of keeping a running total of things that I think are not so great about the industrial rev and things that are good. Obviously, working conditions really tipped the scale in not so good. And ultimately, today, when you look at tenements, you're going to find out some other reasons that weren't so good about the industrial rev. So as you're reading or thinking any thoughts about things that are good or bad, you're going to list them here. Now, to be clear, right here, you could list any of the inventions and talk about how it improved lives. So you could have a whole lot more here just based off inventions. I just did not choose to do that right now. So once you have now gone over the learning work you completed yesterday, I'm going to go over what you need to complete for today. You are going to start by reading about the growth of cities and living conditions. So you're going to find out what tenements are. So it's in 24.5. There's also some images in Schoology of what tenements look like. So go ahead and look at those too. And then after you've read and looked at those images, make sure you filled in that graphic organizer in the box that says living conditions. Then once you've done that, you're going to think about things that are good and or bad about tenements, and once again go and add to your chart down at the bottom of benefits and costs. Then you're going to go take the industrial rev living and working conditions check-in, and you're going to end up the end of the hour by looking at labor unions. This was in direct response to what we talked about yesterday with working conditions. So you're going to read about them and you're going to write down what labor unions are, because they're still around today, what they tried to do and how. So how did they try to get things to be changed? What methods did they use? And then you're going to finish up by explaining whether you believed they were successful using supporting evidence. As always, if you guys have any questions, send me a Schoology message. I hope you have a great weekend.